Okay, here's what you actually need to know about the SAT English test. And I will be covering every single type of question on the exam, but first thing I want you to do is skip the first half of the test. No, I'm serious. I want you to skip to around question 16 or so when you get into the grammar and punctuation questions, which are going to have this question stem talking about standard English conventions. Now you're going to want to look at the answer choices to determine what type of grammar or punctuation question you're dealing with. Punctuation questions are going to be easy to spot because you've got a bunch of punctuation in the answers. For punctuation or boundaries questions, as College Board calls them, you are going to want to just focus on one sentence. Be lazy, one sentence only. From here, ignoring the rest of the passage, you're just going to apply punctuation rules. Don't rely on what sounds right. Make sure that you actually know the rules, and you will need to know all of them. That said, if you have limited time, I would focus on learning the comma rules since they govern every other rule on the SAT. And I'll leave a link to a cheat sheet with all that stuff for you in the description. Coming back to this question, we've got a rule that I call non-essential info, where basically all of this stuff, including the word which, can get eliminated. Because reading it without this, we get Milkman's research can address anomalies that neoclassical economic models cannot explain. So basically all that stuff between the two dashes, answers choice A, by the way, is going to be non-essential information, which can be set off by two dashes. You could also set it off with two commas, but we don't have a comma ending and we're not allowed to mix and match. So choice B doesn't work. Choice C doesn't have any punctuation, and choice D has the dash in the wrong place. Now for grammar, we have a number of subcategories that we're going to need to focus on. The first being verbs. And these questions are actually quite easy if you know how to deal with them. Start with the odd verb out trick. And the odd verb out trick goes a little something like this. Step 1, ignore everything except for, well, the answers. Step 2, put down they and she. Step 3, match they and she to the answers. For example, we would say they fascinate, and then we would say she has fascinated, she fascinates, she is fascinating. The odd verb out is the one that doesn't match the other three. Basically, if it is plural and the other three are singular, like we have here, then the plural one is our answer, right? Let's look at another one. Again, we're going to ignore the entire passage and we're just going to look at the answers. This time we'll use they and he, and you can use he, she, or it. Any singular pronoun is going to work for this. In this case, we have they are, they were, they have been, three plurals versus he was, the only singular, which means D is our answer. Of course, if the odd verb out trick doesn't work, then you know that you're dealing with verb tense, and you're going to want to check the surrounding text to figure out what the verb tense should be. Here, for example, we start with our odd verb out trick, and we run into an issue because if we say they developing, that doesn't make sense. And it doesn't work either. It developing, that doesn't make sense. As soon as one answer doesn't work for either one of them, we know that we're not going to be able to use the odd verb out trick. Similarly, if both of them work for an answer, we should also get suspicious because that's not going to work. So we're going to have to actually look at our passage, unfortunately. And now it's simply matching up the tense to the answers. So here we can ignore this non-essential information and we notice simple past tense premiered. So we're looking for another simple past tense verb. Choice B developed is that simple past tense verb we're looking for. For pronoun questions, all you need to do is find your antecedent, that's a fancy word for the original noun that's being replaced, and then choose your answer accordingly. On this one, for example, the human brain is our original noun, and that is a thing, so our answer would be it. Pro tip, get rid of any sort of non-essential information between commas. That way you can easily put this together. The human brain is primed to recognize faces, so much so that it will even find faces in clouds. These questions, which are known as modifier questions, look complicated, but they're actually quite simple once you know how to approach them. And we can use something called the front flip trick on these guys. And by the way, you know you're dealing with a modifier question when you've got a comma right before the blank space, and all of your answers start with a different grammatical subject, right? And when I flip my answers onto the front of this sentence, I want to create a new simple sentence. So for example, choice A would sound something like, Henry recovered 2 years later. So I'm taking the thing that's happening and I'm taking the subject from my answer choice and making a new sentence. Choice B would be the rain recovered 2 years later. That doesn't make any sense. C, Henry's rain, again, rain recovered. And then D, it recovered 2 years later. Also doesn't make sense. So basically, you do your little front flip trick, and the only answer that makes sense is going to be the correct answer. For possession, they should be pretty easy. There's just a couple of sneaky things that you want to look out for. You should already know that apostrophes are going to be the thing that shows possession most of the time. And for your singular words, you're going to have an apostrophe and an S added on. But then for irregular nouns that already end in S, you're just going to put that apostrophe either after the S, or you're going to add another apostrophe S on top of it. For plural, we're going to have the apostrophe after the S. And if we have an irregular plural that does not end in S, then we're simply going to follow the same rule as our normal singular. Now, the really weird one that you got to look out for is plural individuals. So in this case, Maria's and Omar's cats are both beautiful. Because they both have their own individual cats, we need an apostrophe for Maria's and for Omar's. Whereas if the two people share the possession, for example, Robert and Natalie's cat is ugly, there's only one cat that they both own together. So in this case, the last person in the list takes the apostrophe, and that's it. So in this case, from the answers, we know that we're trying to figure out if screws is possessive and if threads is possessive. Threads, there's a period after it, so there's no way that that's going to be our answer. So we can get rid of choice D right off the bat, and actually choice A for that matter, because again, you can't possess a period. And then does the screw possess? Well, I guess it has to, but the trick would be the threads of the screws, the threads of the screws. So now it's just between either plural or singular. So let's look for context. Inventor John Freeman created a prototype by inserting a screw. Singular, one screw. That means choice C is our answer. And obviously for all of those questions, we could go into a lot more detail. So like I mentioned earlier, just use the link in the description for a free cheat sheet bundle. It's going to include every rule that you need to know on the SAT. Anyway, after you get past the grammar and punctuation, you're going to encounter transition questions, and they slap. And you should slap them back. The S in slap stands for scan, and we're going to scan two sentences, the one with the blank space and the one before it. And as we scan, we're trying to come up with sort of a just simplified main idea for each sentence. So basically, we have one example of married people in a situation, and then another example of married people in a situation. So the L in slap is link, and we want to link these together. What I'm seeing is two examples of similar things. The A in slap is to anticipate what the answer is going to be. So we want to come up with our own answer. And if we have two similar things, my go-to is usually similarly. So I'm going to anticipate similarly. And finally, the P in slap is to purge. I'm going to get rid of any answer choices that do not match my anticipation. So granted does not go with similarly. For example does not go with similarly. Likewise does, hence does not. So my answer is choice C, likewise. Finally, you're going to run into rhetorical synthesis questions, also known as these questions that have students taking notes. And these also look kind of annoying, but they're usually really very simple. And for these guys, we're going to completely ignore the notes. That's our first step. And then we just need to focus on the student's goal. The student's always going to have some sort of a goal. So in this case, it says wants to emphasize a similarity between these two things, whatever they are. So looking at our answer choices, we have a contrast. We have larger. Those are both differences. Choice C only mentions one of them. Choice D is our answer because it says that this one's a light sculpture, as is this other one. So that's the only one that gives us the similarity we're looking for, and we did not have to look at the notes. You won't have to look at the notes for most of these. Of course, you might come across one like this, where you do have to look at the notes, but you still want to start by ignoring them. So let's pretend we're ignoring the notes, and it says we want to present the findings of a study. So authors concluded, that would be a finding. These people found, that would be a finding. Found, that would be a finding. Found. So now we realize, okay, 3 of these must just be straight up wrong because they're all going to do the thing that I want it to do. So now we actually have to figure out which one of these is correct. And you can pause the video and try this on your own if you'd like, but basically choice C is going to be the only one that works here because it matches the notes, whereas the others give us erroneous information. All right, now let's go back to the beginning, and we're going to start with vocabulary or words in context questions. And the strategy really is in the name, words in context. You need to consider the surrounding context in order to get the correct answer. So ideally, we're going to find either a phrase or a word or an example that is a synonym or an antonym of the blank space. On this question, we have a colon, which is really great because it's telling us everything after this colon is probably an example of the blank space. And it's saying that researchers found elkhorn coral produced offspring that inherited some mutations. And this starts off with, while most are incapable of passing mutations. So this is an exception to the rule. My prediction here would be exception, and then I just need to match that to my answer choices. Hypothesis does not work. Affinity does not work. An anomaly is an exception. D, corroboration does not work. And yeah, an anomaly, the correct answer is basically something that is out of the norm. It is an exception. You've also got these guys, which look a little bit different, where you're actually replacing a word. The thing is, you want to treat them just like the other ones because often you're going to have some really old text. So you want to ignore that original word because it's usually something that's being used in a weird way. And if you just try to find a synonym for it, you're going to get the wrong answer. Instead, pretend it's a blank space and do the same thing. So in this case, it says a blank change began to be visible, and then we get a description. So even though we don't have a colon here, this is a description of that change. And basically we see these crushed, dried petals coming back to life. So my prediction is going to be something like a dramatic change. Again, trying to match to my answers here. Lonely doesn't work with dramatic. Disagreeable does not work. Acceptable, no. Extraordinary, yeah, that works with dramatic. So choice D is my answer. Once you get past the vocabulary questions, you get into the more intensive reading-based questions. And for all of these, we're going to want to use the CAPE strategy. Q stands for question, and you want to start with the question because it is going to determine how you do the next step, which is to analyze the passage. For detail-based questions like command of evidence, function, or just detail, you're going to want to start with that detail and cherry pick the passage accordingly. In this text, for example, it is asking specifically about how people regard this person. So as I pass my eyes over the text, I'm looking for this person's name. I see it here, and I'm also looking for what people have to say. It is a saying. That would mean that people say this. So I'm noticing that basically he has lots of family secrets. Skipping past all these details, I notice the family secrets are mentioned again at the end. Do not fly out. So this is probably what I'd be paying attention to during my analyze step. For function questions, they're always going to give you an underlined phrase, which makes things easy because you literally just go to the underlined phrase and you start with that sentence and then you decide if you need to work backwards or forwards to get any sort of additional context. So here it says, this person studied like a rock, a soft kind of rock. And I already feel like I have an idea of what that means, so I would probably just stop there. Basically, I'm thinking this is like a qualifier or a caveat. For command of evidence, you're always going to be either supporting or weakening a conclusion or claim of some sort. And this one, we're looking to weaken it. For these, you want to start backwards. So you'll start at the end and work your way backwards because the conclusion or the claim tends to be at the end. And indeed, we see a student argues, so that's going to be the conclusion, that emotionality is unrelated to success. That's the thing that I know I'm trying to weaken. So that's what the analyze step usually looks like for textual command of evidence. For big picture-based passages like inferences, central idea, and main purpose, you're going to want to skim through the passage, slowing down for main ideas and skipping or reading very quickly through details. And speaking of main ideas, for these questions, you're going to be wanting to look especially at the beginning and the ending of passages, since that's where main ideas tend to live. On this one, I know from experience that if you are introducing something with a date, it usually means the main idea is closer to the end. So I'd be paying attention to this last sentence and basically guessing that the main idea has something to do with Miranda and Miranda's importance in creating this letter. For structure questions, you are looking to break the text into sections. So I would probably look at this and say the first part here is going to be basically introducing a hypothesis about why this is happening. And then we get some supporting evidence for that hypothesis. So that's the analyze step for structure questions. For purpose questions, we want to make sure not to conflate purpose with main idea. While main idea is what the text is about, purpose is what the text does. And you're going to notice in all the answer choices, you have these verbs that are kind of like an essay, right? You have like explanatory essays that explain things. You have argumentative essays. You have compare and contrast. So as you read through and try to come up with a prediction, which is coming next, you're analyzing what the text is doing. Just passing my eyes over, it seems like this text is giving sort of a general overview of this person, Miguel. For inference questions, unfortunately, especially in Module 2, you're going to probably want to actually read the entire text. Our analyze step should be trying to understand the text as well as possible so that we can get to the end and actually fill in the blank. That's what these questions are asking you to do. And as you analyze, you definitely want to keep an eye out for any sort of negating language or transition words. In this one, we're not really seeing that. So instead, I would try to just break down the text and make sure I understand exactly what's going on. So the first sentence, for example, I would say disruptions equal more enjoyment of enjoyable. And then it says suspecting disruptions to unpleasant experience would have the opposite effect. They had them do this other thing, and they anticipated that interruptions in this would blank. And basically, if we're looking for the opposite, I would be thinking disruptions of unpleasant would be more unpleasant. Of course, now we're getting into the prediction, which we'll talk about in a second. For cross-text connection questions, you're actually going to want to start with the responder. And I'm talking about the most common type of cross-text connections where you have some text responding to another text. And here it says, how would author 2 respond? So I want to actually start with text 2. My main idea would be something along the lines of new degree of urbanization. We'll just say DOU makes understanding rates easy. And this is now my perspective as I read text 1. And it does say respond to the problem in text 1. So I want to look specifically for what the problem is. This variation makes it difficult to compare aspects of urbanization. What variation are we talking about? Countries do not use the same number. And again, this is talking about urbanization rates. So already, because I know that text 2 says this new DOU makes it easy, I would respond with something like, well, use DOU, man. Of course, there are also these other cross-text connections questions where you're being asked to agree. Basically, which would both of them agree with? And for these, it doesn't matter what order you read in. Basically, you want to understand the main idea of both texts, but you also want to look for anything that is consistent amongst the two texts. So just scanning through this, we see that we're talking about this piece of work that was co-authored by these two guys. And then at the end, it mentioned something about this other person who was involved in possibly writing this book. And then text 2, it seems to be talking about the same thing. And I'm not seeing anything about that Philip guy, but it does talk about John. So in my analysis, the thing that I'm noticing that shows up in both is this John Fletcher character. So the thing that's agreed upon is probably going to have something to do with him. The P in CAPE stands for predict, and you're going to predict your own answer. This does two really important things. First, it makes sure that you actually comprehend what you're reading. And second, it keeps you from picking distractor answers, which the SAT is full of. Going back to this detail question, for example, I was paying attention again to this saying about this guy having family secrets and how they do not fly out like a flock of parrots. So my prediction is going to be he does not tell the secrets that he knows. Finally, the E in CAPE is going to be to eliminate any answers that don't match your prediction. Trying to choose the answer rather than eliminate wrong answers can cause you to choose those distractor answers that I mentioned earlier. So going back to this question, I'm going to simply eliminate any answers that don't match he does not tell the secrets. But come to tolerate him despite his appearance? No. Few feel concerned he will divulge their confidences. That would be not being concerned about them telling secrets, so that works. C, some dislike how freely he discusses his own family. That's the opposite of what we're looking for. Most would be unimpressed by him if not for his expertise. No. So now I know that my correct answer is choice B. Finally, some of the hardest questions in the SAT English section tend to be these graph-based questions. And the great news is you're actually going to ignore the graphic unless you absolutely have to look at it. So let me just demo this thing for you. We're looking at this question. We're thinking, oh no, I hate this. I don't know what these words mean. What's going on here? Regardless, step one, ignore the graphic. We really just want to treat these like the other command of evidence questions, because at the end of the day, we're supporting or weakening some sort of a hypothesis or conclusion most of the time. So again, start backwards, and the team concluded there is evidence that stuff in the meteorite formed in space, not the result of Earth. And we're going to simplify this as much as possible. This is our prediction. Our prediction is that we want to support something along the lines of formed in space only, no Earth. And that's it. We're going to ignore the rest of the passage, and we're going to ignore the graphic. Let's see if we can get our answer. Choice A, this stuff detected in both meteorite samples, but not in soil. So meteorite, space, soil, Earth. That actually fits. Choice B, these two things detected in both of the meteorite samples and in the soil sample. That's a distractor. It's saying that it was found in both, but we don't want it in Earth, so B is out. C, this stuff was detected in both meteorite sample 2 and in the soil sample. Same thing, it's mentioning Earth and space, aka soil and meteorite, so C's out. And then D, the stuff detected in the meteorite sample 1, but not in sample 2. This is tricky because it talks about only meteorites, but it's comparing meteorite to meteorite, but we need to compare meteorite to soil, aka space to Earth. So that doesn't have all the ingredients that we're looking for. Our answer is choice A. But Robert, what if that doesn't work? Don't we have to look at the graphic sometimes? Well, yeah, sometimes. So for this one, let's start off by ignoring the graphic as we want to usually do at the beginning. And here we want to complete the text. Concluded, sleep may not be homeostatically regulated. So this one, I feel like I need a little bit more context because I don't know what homeostatically regulated means. So I'm going to cherry pick the passage first. And it says homeostatically regulated means compensate for periods of REM sleep deprivation by increasing subsequent REM sleep. So in simple terms, which we always want to put things in, it means make up for lost sleep. I feel like we do that as humans too, right? Anyway, they concluded that this may not be the case for fur seals. So my prediction is going to be something that supports they do not make up for lost sleep. So going through my answer choices here, again, we're just eliminating. Didn't show significantly less REM sleep during the second day than the first day after returning. If we're looking to make up for lost sleep, showing less doesn't make sense. B, showed no significant difference in one another from baseline levels of REM sleep. This is wrong in all sorts of ways. It's talking about comparing to each other, but we should be looking for making up for lost sleep. C, didn't consistently demonstrate an increase in REM sleep after their period of deprivation. That fits. D, showed no significant difference between REM sleep after returning to land and REM sleep in the water. That also fits. So now you see we have two answers that match my prediction. And this is when you know you do need to look at the graphic. That said, don't look at the actual numbers. Most of the time, when you do need to look at the graphic, you just want to look at the way the graphic is labeled because something is not going to fit the language of one of the answers, basically. You will sometimes have to look at the numbers, but hopefully not. So here, if we look at choice D, it says, no significant difference between REM sleep after returning to land and REM sleep while in the water. Well, we see sleep on land, and where's sleep on water? That's right, it's not there. So because we only have information about sleep on land, choice D could never work. So our answer is choice C. Now, if you're low on time or you just don't know where to start, again, use the link in the description. I'll give you free access to my cheat sheet bundle. It covers every single hack, rule, strategy that you're going to need to know for the SAT.